Everything didn't just fall apart, it was already falling apart, piece by piece, message by message, lie by lie, and the moment Meghan saw those texts, the illusion didn't crack, it detonated. What she found wasn't a mistake, not a moment of weakness, not even betrayal in its simplest form. It was planning, cold, deliberate, sustained deception stretching back months, maybe years, and suddenly every silence, every absence, every strange shift in energy inside that relationship started to make a horrifying kind of sense. Because what do you do when the person standing beside you isn't just lying, but orchestrating an entire parallel life behind your back?
Harry does have an interest elsewhere, and that you notice I say if, and I do so for legal reasons, and you also notice for legal reasons I haven't said that he's having an affair with this woman.
Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's American dream is apparently officially over.
Invictus Games organizers delighted that one Meghan Markle didn't show up for the big one-year countdown in Birmingham.
Meghan needed something. The week had gone so wrong for Harry, most notably the court case, because she would have been at the Invictus Games, I'm pretty sure, launch on Friday, if it had gone well.
Now it's just completely chaotic, and I'm scared for his future, to be quite honest. It just seems like a rough shot. We don't know what is going to happen.
It has been said, chums, from an excellent source, that Meghan Markle actually now ponders what was the whole point of that, very private expedition over to the United Kingdom.
It's absolutely appalling. He doesn't know, and how can he make a judgment like that? I mean, the Justice Nicklin is a very well-known, careful.
She couldn't even just show up to be in the background, to not make a fuss, to just be low maintenance.
Harry just is unable to do at this point because he's so wrapped up in Meghan's world.
It started so quietly, it almost feels insulting in hindsight. A phone left on a table, a notification lighting up in the corner of a screen, something so ordinary it shouldn't have meant anything. But Meghan didn't ignore it, and that's where everything changed. Because what she saw wasn't just a message, it was a doorway into a version of Harry she had never been allowed to see. And the deeper she looked, the worse it became. Who was this contact? Why was the tone so familiar? Why did it feel like reading something that had been written 100 times before? Questions began stacking on top of questions faster than answers could form. And that's the moment where suspicion stops being curiosity and becomes certainty.
And you also notice, for legal reasons, I haven't said that he's having an affair with this woman, nor have I said that he's having a post-marital or anything affair with this woman.
And here's where the narrative takes a darker turn, because the messages weren't random. They weren't careless. They were structured, timed, almost rehearsed. Words about escape, about freedom, about when this is over. Over? What exactly was this? A marriage? A life? A public identity? The implications were explosive, because if someone is talking about leaving before they've even been caught, then they're not reacting, they're preparing. And suddenly, the entire relationship starts to look like something else entirely. Not a partnership, not even a conflict, a setup.
It's a surprise and not a surprise, because we knew things weren't going well, but to finally have even more confirmation of how badly things are going, even more confirmation of how badly Harry wants back in, just goes to show and prove that Harry and Meghan leaving was a massive mistake, probably led by Meghan, that Harry really didn't consider. And as they get to Hollywood, they're finding out that, well, maybe the industry is interested in you for couple of moments here and there.
The more that surfaced, the more impossible it became to dismiss. These weren't accidental slip-ups. These were calculated moves, meetings disguised as work, conversations hidden behind routine. While Meghan believed they were trying to fix things, he was already somewhere else emotionally, mentally, physically. That's the part that doesn't just hurt, it rewrites everything. Because how long had this been happening? Weeks? Months? And if it had been going on that long, then every public appearance, every statement, every carefully constructed moment suddenly looks like performance. Not truth, never truth.
It got out from friends and relations and supporters of the royal family who knew exactly what was happening while it was happening and after it had happened, and have opened their mouth.
And then comes the detail that changes the entire scale of this story. This wasn't some anonymous figure drifting in and out of his life. This was someone established, someone local, someone integrated, someone who had access, real access to his world. That means conversations weren't rushed. They weren't secretive in the traditional sense. They were comfortable, familiar, ongoing, and when a connection reaches that level, it stops being an affair in the traditional sense. It becomes something else entirely. A second life.
As I said a day or two ago, I don't remember exactly when I said it, it's a rerun of the whole Charles and Diana saga, where Diana was leaking like a sieve by Paul Dacre's own account and Richard Kay's and the late David English's at the time. She leaked to the press with a facility that only Harry and Meghan have been able to employ. And Charles would tell all his friends and relations, don't say a thing, keep your mouth shut.
That's when everything inside Meghan reportedly broke open. Not slowly, not quietly, all at once. Because there's a difference between suspecting something and seeing it confirmed in front of you in undeniable detail. Or the confrontation wasn't controlled, it couldn't be. Questions came rapidly, relentlessly. Who is she? How long? Why? And here's the detail that keeps resurfacing like a warning sign no one can ignore. Harry didn't deny it. He didn't collapse under the weight of guilt. He didn't scramble to fix what had just been exposed. He stood there almost detached, as if this outcome had already been calculated, as if this reaction had already been expected. And that's the moment the story shifts from betrayal to something far more unsettling. Because what kind of person doesn't react when everything is on the line? What kind of person behaves like they've already accepted the consequences before they arrive? That's not panic, that's preparation. Because when you start lining up the timeline, patterns begin to emerge. Not coincidences, patterns, rumors from early 2022, subtle inconsistencies, public narratives that didn't quite align with private behavior. And now this, a fully active relationship happening in parallel. It forces a question that refuses to stay quiet. Was any of this accidental? Or was it all part of something bigger? And the deeper you go, the more uncomfortable that question becomes. Because the affair doesn't sit alone. It connects to the rumors, to the contradictions, to the growing sense that everything wasn't just unraveling, it was being managed, directed, controlled from behind the scenes. And that's where the illusion doesn't just crack, it starts exposing everything that was buried underneath for years. Because once those messages were seen, once the pattern became undeniable, Meghan wasn't just confronting an affair, Meghan was confronting a version of Harry that had been hidden in plain sight all along. The silence that followed wasn't confusion, it was recognition. Recognition that this wasn't new behavior, it was just newly discovered behavior. And suddenly, every past controversy, every strange decision, every moment that didn't quite make sense begins to align into something much more calculated, something far more deliberate than anyone wanted to admit publicly, because the affair didn't exist in isolation. And that's the part that keeps pulling the story deeper. It connected directly to everything else that had already been raising questions: financial inconsistencies, public contradictions, narratives that kept shifting depending on who was listening. The timeline becomes impossible to ignore. Early whispers about another woman begin quietly, almost dismissed at first. At the same time, other narratives begin forming. Narratives that don't quite align with observable reality, narratives that required careful management, careful timing, careful control. And while those narratives were being defended publicly, something entirely different was unfolding privately. Something that required precision, coordination, and above all, intent. Because managing one deception is difficult. Managing multiple at the same time requires something else entirely. It requires planning. It requires awareness. It requires participation. And that's the part that shifts the entire perception of Harry from someone reacting to circumstances into someone actively shaping them. Because while one story was being protected through silence, another was being lived out in real time, with real people, with real consequences that couldn't be hidden forever. And that difference in response silence in one area, movement in another, raises a question that doesn't go away. Why protect one narrative so carefully while allowing another to spiral into exposure? And then the financial pressure begins to surface, not quietly but persistently, like something that refuses to stay buried. Numbers begin circulating, questions begin forming, accounts that don't quite add up, deals that don't deliver what was promised, expectations collapsing under the weight of reality. And right in the middle of that pressure, right at the moment where everything begins tightening, this relationship intensifies. That timing doesn't feel random, it feels connected, because when pressure builds in one area, people don't just collapse, they look for exits, they look for solutions, they look for alternatives that can sustain what's already falling apart. And that's where the interpretation becomes unavoidable. Because this wasn't just emotional escape, it begins to look like strategic escape, a new connection forming exactly when the existing structure starts failing, a new possibility emerging exactly when the old one becomes unsustainable. And for Meghan, that realization wasn't just painful, it was devastating in a way that goes far beyond betrayal, because it suggests replacement wasn't based on emotion alone. It suggests replacement was based on value, on stability, on something measurable. And when someone realizes they've been replaced not because they were unloved, but because they were no longer useful, the collapse isn't just emotional, it's identity shattering, because everything Meghan built was tied to that identity. Titles, visibility, influence, recognition, none of it exists independently. It exists because of the connection. And the moment that connection becomes unstable, everything attached to it becomes unstable as well. That's the trap. Because leaving doesn't just mean ending a relationship, it means dismantling an entire constructed identity. But staying means something equally unbearable, remaining inside a reality where the truth is known but cannot be acknowledged publicly. And that's the position Meghan found herself in. Not a choice between right and wrong, but a choice between collapse and containment. And the most unsettling part is how clearly that position appears to be understood. Because when one person in a situation knows the other has nowhere to go, the balance of power shifts completely. Suddenly, actions don't require justification. They don't require concealment in the same way, because consequences are no longer equal. And that's exactly what this situation begins to look like, a dynamic where one side holds all the leverage and the other is forced into silence. Not by force, but by circumstance. And while all of this is unfolding internally, something else is happening externally. The audience is watching, observing, interpreting, and the reaction isn't what anyone expected. Because instead of sympathy, there's scrutiny. Instead of alignment, there's division. People aren't just reacting emotionally, they're analyzing patterns, connecting timelines, questioning narratives that once went unchallenged. And when enough people begin seeing the same pattern independently, it stops being speculation and starts becoming perception. A collective shift in how the entire situation is understood. And right in the center of that shift, one detail stands out more than anything else, not what was said, not what was denied, but what wasn't addressed at all. Silence in the face of specific questions. Silence where clarity should exist. Silence that feels less like privacy and more like strategy. Because silence, when used correctly, isn't absence, it's control. It's the ability to let certain narratives fade while others dominate the conversation.